set up the conversation that we're going to talk about today.
I'm going to talk about a conversation I had with my friend Jenny. At the time, I would have said we were acquaintances. There was one day where we were at something that all of our mutual friends were at. She's always there. So I'm talking to them about getting together and talking about some real things. These are people that I kind of knew were open to faith-based questions. I'm inviting them into a conversation or something more intentional, weekly. She's there, so it would have felt weird to not include her, even though she wasn't close. So she kind of got invited because she was there. And shockingly enough, she said,
This week on the Reach Podcast. All right, everybody. Hey, welcome back. We are here on the Reach Podcast, and I've got a very special guest today. This is Alyssa Perry, and she is Search's area director in Columbia, Tennessee, not far from where I lived for a very long time. And Alyssa, thank you so much for being here on the podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
It's going to be fun. Tell us a little about Columbia, Tennessee, because a lot of people, we just had this happen at lunch, actually. They think, well, it's by Nashville, so it's Nashville. But it's not Nashville.
It's not Nashville, and it doesn't want to be Nashville. It would be, I guess, what you would call a suburb of Nashville, but it's really two counties away, so it's not even side by side. So it's not part of the greater Nashville area. It does have a lot of people, though, that travel to and from for work. People come to Columbia because they want more space, they want more bang for their buck, or just a smaller town feel. So because of that, it also really strives to have its own identity. So it's very different than Nashville. It's a more small town, more suburban. I see a lot of the same people every day. But I also can go all over the county and see some of the same people versus what I assume in bigger cities, you're kind of in these smaller pockets of location.
100%. Yeah. Columbia's a cool little city because it's like a big small town for real. It's got
it's a continually growing small town too. It's busting at the seams, but it feels big, but it can be as small as you make it as well.
Yeah. Well, and let's see, you've been with us with Search about a year. Is that right?
Almost a year, June 3rd.
Okay, so not far away, or maybe in the past, depending on when this comes out. But in the last year, developing a brand new area for Search and all the fun things that come along with that, we want to look at a conversation, just like we do here every week on the podcast, and talk about it, because we're really here to help people see that they can talk about their faith too. It's not just for the pros. Anybody can do this, and it's actually kind of fun. It can be enjoyable. So set up the conversation that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a conversation I had with my friend Jenny. I would say the best way to describe her and I would be, I wouldn't even say friend. It's probably not the right word. Now, of course, we're friends, but at the time I would have said we were acquaintances, similar to... Imagine it, anywhere you go, you kind of always see the same mom or dad at school drop-off or at the grocery store. I would say she and I just always found ourselves in the same locations, but never really investing in each other. I would know her name. She would know my name. I wouldn't think that she would have any negative thoughts or feelings towards me, or even really honestly that I was a blimp on her radar, if we're being honest. But she was always around.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you've got people like that as well. And so I think, you know, the when we actually kind of crossed whatever that jump the broom or whatever it's called, you know, that's not the word.
Must be,
when
Tennessee,
the conversation,
I've never heard that
that's
one.
not it either. I think I'm confusing that with jump the shark, which is also not the right thing. But when we finally kind of crossed over would be, there was one day where I can't even remember exactly where we were at. We were at something that all of our mutual friends were at. And of course, she's always there. So I'm talking to them about getting together and talking about some real things. These are people that I kind of knew were open to faith-based questions. And I wouldn't have called it a small group necessarily to them, but in my mind, I'm inviting them into a conversation or something more intentional, weekly. And she's there, so it would have felt weird to not include her, even though she wasn't close. So she kind of got invited because she was there. And shockingly enough, she said yes. And that's when I realized, oh, wait, I'm actually kind of really intimidated by her. So it was like, I'm so excited. Oh, wait, I should have thought this through. But she said yes, and she came. And so we went from I still wouldn't call us friends, but we spent a number of weeks as a group in a setting talking about a myriad of different things. And for whatever reason, and I'm trying to remember why, because it wasn't a seasonal thing, we got on the resurrection for a long time. Like, it was a multiple weeks of talking about the resurrection. And it was great. I mean, everybody wanted to know details, and it wasn't necessarily people were poking holes or any of that, but it just lended itself to multiple conversations. But I do remember specifically when it comes to Jenny feeling like, hey, we're having some great conversations as a group, but I'm just not really sure the needle was moving at all for her and I. Like, we weren't necessarily becoming closer. And she wasn't really engaging or talking, or I honestly, I thought, why is she here? You know, like, she wants out. I should give her an out. Until later that night, when it's kind of the same night that I was having that thought of, like, how do I give her an easy exit so it's not always feeling like she's got to be at this? She sends me a text, and we end up talking on the phone for over an hour. And because she was shyer and quiet, turns out in a group setting, those shy, quiet ones maybe don't always get their questions addressed. And so she spent over an hour asking questions about the resurrection, which was really interesting. And it wasn't necessarily, like I said, it wasn't because she was debunking or debating at all. It was almost like she just wanted every detail, because it was almost like she had already decided what she believed, but wanted to know why she believed it. She wanted to know every fact and detail. And then something switched. Because about that hour and a 15-minute mark, it's quickly shifted from the resurrection to her talking about herself and, like, peeling back these layers. I mean, it was almost whiplash, right? Because here I'm thinking, we're not even friends. She's hating this. Then she's talking to me about the resurrection, and now she's talking about how lost she feels, or I think her exact words were how messed up she felt, how life felt so messed up for her. And so I would say the conversation, if I could remember it by detail, would be more like me finally, just after listening for a long time of her just going. My first question wasn't a good one. Probably shouldn't have asked it. Probably wouldn't ask it again, but was just like, why? Like, why are you telling me all of this now? I don't think I said it in a mean way, but I was just so shocked by her willingness to tell me. And her response was simple, that, you know, she had grown up in the church. She had always thought, though, it was about memorize this, read this, do these things. And she said, for some reason, it felt real now, and it felt like it mattered, and that she felt like God was telling her that I was the person she had been praying for, which sounds super spiritual. But to me, I took that as, you mean I was always around? Which, you know, I'm inviting her because she's always around, and she feels like I'm someone that's safe to talk to because I'm always around. And so our conversation really felt a lot like just listening. She did most of the talking, and my questions really were more like, wow, or why, or why do you think this? Who, you know, entering into who she was. But I didn't do a lot of the talking.
Well, I think that's one of the keys, though. I mean, This is what's so great about this conversation, this example you're talking about, is oftentimes people, I think it's easy for them to think that they have to do a lot of the talking, or they've got to have 20 questions ready, or a bunch of information to share. And oftentimes we move the needle by not saying really anything.
Yeah.
And how rare it is. Let me ask you if this is true. I'm totally guessing.
Yeah.
But from what you shared, like, I would guess that she wanted to talk with you that day and spilled out her guts because there probably just wasn't anybody else in her life. Even though probably from your perspective, you're going, I'm not really doing anything. I'm just hosting some people for a couple weeks here. But for her, that might have been the most anybody's invested in her in who knows how long. Hey everybody, I wanted to take a moment and let you know that the Reach podcast is brought to you by Search, a ministry dedicated to sharing Jesus through friendships and conversations for nearly 50 years. Learn more or get involved at searchnational.org. You
know, I can only assume, I don't really know much about her life before the word vomits, right? Like before she kind of all comes out with all the stuff. But I can assume that I was probably the only one asking these type of questions. But I just assumed that I'm also maybe one of the only people that she felt safe in that moment, because who else is inviting her into those conversations? But also she's watching her friends that she does know and trust sit with me. So there was a little level of trust there. But it was interesting because after I can't even tell you how long she talked, but I do remember at one moment saying, all right, like, take this opportunity. And I invited her to dinner because all of this was over the phone. Like we've had a group setting, we've had a phone conversation, and now I'm like, all right, let's try to see what happens. So I invited her to dinner. We get together a week later, and it still looked really similar. She did most of the talking, but it became this weekly thing. Honestly, we would just come for an hour, not one night a week, and sometimes we'd have a Bible and talk about Jesus specific things. Sometimes we would talk about Jenny specific things. And as she kind of started sharing her life, it opened up for me to be able to naturally kind of interject my story as well. And it became a sweet friendship. I mean, we started passing books that felt meaningful to each other, because she kind of explained a little bit more of her, I wouldn't say she had church hurt by any means, but I don't know that she had any of the foundational basics. And so as I kind of figured out where she was, why the resurrection was so captivating for her, we started exchanging books. She would give me books and I'd give her books. And so, I mean, if I can remember, we read things like The Jesus I Never Knew by Philip Yancey, or Dangerous Wonder, or The Foolishness of Jesus, or Disappointment with God. I'm trying to think of the wide variety of books that but just as many books as I would pass to her, she would pass to me. Yeah. So it felt like our friendship was really forged in being a place where we could talk about our faith, but more individually. I think at the core, a lot of people don't have people, they feel they're so lost and they don't realize, like, no matter how much they feel lost, like God cares for them and is searching for them and looking for them. And so, like, when we look at Luke 15 and the parable that's everybody's so familiar with, if we're going to live that out in everyday life, like, it feels like this conversation and friendship with my friend Jenny. Like, it feels like just listening and showing her value, no matter how lost she might feel, like her value and the space to be heard. I think that was part of it too, just having empathy and being willing. I don't know where else a lot of people get to just talk about themselves and someone just listens, except for counseling, where you pay a lot of money for that. But you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I don't know that she had that type of friendship. But it also, for me, it was a growth edge too, because I've got to check my judgment at the door too. As she's saying things, your normal inclination, right, is to like step in with this great advice, or to preach, or to, behavior modify. Like, oh, but there was just something sweet about letting her talk and lead the conversation versus me, because then I get to check my judgment at the door and realize, like, we're just going to talk about Jesus. We're going to talk about what is actually important. And I think it really set us up to foster deeper conversation. We're still friends. I actually texted her today because I knew I was going to come and talk about our friendship and kind of where it started. And I think we have a deeper friendship. And I haven't seen her in years in person. She does a lot of traveling. We live in different parts of the world now. But I'm confident that if she walked in today, we could step right back into those deep conversations versus some friendships that we have or acquaintances that we have where it would start off with, how's your day? How's the weather? How your kid? I'm fairly confident that we could just step right back in. But I think most of that comes from just listening and a mutual respect for each other's stories.
Sure. When you guys were first talking, mm-hmm. was there a certain thing or just a certain issue or thought or question that kept her from Jesus, or that was kind of a stumbling block at all for her? or where was she at when you first started these conversations? I guess is maybe a better way to say it.
Yeah. I don't think that she had a specific question. I think she really struggled with not what the Bible or church or Christians were saying to her, but was really missing the heart behind all of it, and we're all guilty of this, right? Like, we go to the checklist in our minds of, if I'm following Jesus, I must be going to church, I must be reading my Bible, I must be doing all of these things. And really, no one had walked beside her and explained the heart and intention behind the things that people do. And so in her mind, she was failing, she was maybe stuck, and was wondering, really, if I can't do these things, have I ever actually made a decision to follow? Like, if I'm following Jesus, shouldn't this stuff come naturally? So I don't know that the question was really, she never really had a barrier to Jesus, but she had doubts about whether she was actually following, walking, or if this is the stuff that is required, maybe I actually don't want to walk because it's not easy, it's not fun, and it makes me still feel pretty wandering and lost. Like, I know that's probably not answering your question fully, but when you listen to someone talk for 2 straight hours and they unpack a lot of years of things, it's probably really hard to just sit there and pinpoint one thing. But it felt like she was all in on the idea of Jesus, but not all in on her ability to engage in that in a real way, and just needed someone to really talk about, what did Jesus say matters? Like, who are you? But she, if I remember correctly, it was about 3 months later at one of our conversations, told me she had decided to give her life to Jesus. And it wasn't a, altar call at church. It wasn't this, like, a lot of people around. It was just a really sweet conversation. It felt like she had been wrestling for a long time and just needed someone to wrestle with her, alongside of her. But yeah, she gave her life to Jesus, and then you couldn't shut her up about Jesus. So it went from wrestling to feeling confident in a different way. But I would not have looked at her and thought I was inviting her in just to Bible study necessarily. I would never have known that she would have said, I'm not a believer, before our conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the great things about this story, though, really, is because it's messy.
It was so messy.
And these conversations, these relationships, they're not black and white usually. Mm-hmm. There's not, oh, this person believes that or this. And so often they're right there somewhere in the mushy middle where you're like, I can't tell if this person's made a decision, if they know, they're saved by grace through faith in Christ alone, that stuff.
Yeah.
If they're on the other side, maybe they're right before that decision. It can just be hard to tell, but the things that we're talking about here on the podcast of how to have those conversations, those principles apply really no matter where anybody is, even to discipleship, which we don't really get into a whole lot on here. But if you were to walk with her after she made that decision, help her get going, learn the basics, all the same stuff, ask questions.
Yeah, it is exactly, who is it? It's Eugene Peterson that says, like, a long obedience in the same direction. Mm-hmm. The reality is, I have no idea. When I'm entering into a conversation with anyone, I can assume where they are, but I'm probably going to be wrong, right? But we enter in, whether it's discipleship or evangelism or outreach, we enter into the conversation with the same hope and with many of the same principles: listening, being empathetic, respecting the story, fostering deeper conversation. Someone said something once before, which was, how much something is valued, or what the value is of something by how much you will look for it. And at our core, we live in a generation now where we've got a lot of people that have little to no faith of any kind, or people that have walked away from it for different reasons, or people that are kind of stuck. But I'm never walking up to anybody and asking where they are, but I can enter into the conversations wherever they are in the same manner. So it feels like it's not a quick fix, but it does feel like it's the same conversation. I'm going to keep showing up, and if someone's around, I'm going to keep inviting them in, and they can say no, or they can be like my friend Jenny and show up, and it become this beautiful, I mean, I had no idea what our conversation would end up, but I definitely didn't think it was going to end with her telling me, hey, I've decided to give my life to Jesus. I would have thought it was, we're in a Bible study together. We're already doing that. I had no idea at that moment that she would have not called herself a believer.
And that's the point. There's a lot of people that probably we ought to be praying for that are in our lives that we might think are Christians. They might be going to church. They might be sitting next to you at church or some other thing, and you don't even think about them, but they actually don't know the Lord.
Yeah.
And you might not find that out till later, just like you did. So that's very common, especially in America. So, okay, last question.
Yeah.
Great conversation.
Maybe.
/ story.
Yeah.
It's really good. I always like to end this way. So what's one takeaway? Just sum it all up, a principle, a thought, just a little piece of advice that comes from this interaction. But what's the one thing you want our listeners to leave thinking about and maybe put into practice?
Yeah, I think if I had to sum up everything, I think listening is sometimes just as important as the talking. I think sometimes when we're talking about engaging people in organic ways about Jesus, we sometimes think, I've got to have all the answers. I got to know the right answers. I got to be able to defend my faith. Like, I've got to be able to go to battle. And while that is sometimes the case, if the Lord calls you to that, by all means, walk through that door. But sometimes it is being consistent and being around and being attuned to what you are feeling and hearing and being okay to invite. But a lot of times I do think it's more the listening than it is the talking. Now, that doesn't give us an excuse to never talk about Jesus. We're not going to build friendships and relationships and then never walk through that door. Like, what's the point, right? But 90% of the time, if we will listen, that conversation goes so much different than what we're going to pre-plan for, right? Like, if I think I'm going to go meet with my friend so-and-so and I have this idea of what I'm going to say, well, then I'm not listening to a thing that they say. And they may be literally putting on the table, like you said earlier, here's my barrier to faith if you'll listen. And like, here's where I've gotten to this part and I'm stuck because maybe for her, maybe the resurrection was actually the thing. Maybe that was her question. Maybe it was so absurd. Because if you think about it, it is absurd, right?
Yeah.
Outside of faith, it's absurd. If that's the thing that she was hung up on, maybe maybe that is what was her thing. And if I'm not listening to her questions, then I can't help her work through those. So I think the takeaway would be sometimes the evangelism also looks like just listening. That doesn't give us an excuse to stay there, but maybe at the beginning. So
That's a great way to end the podcast. I think that's a great thought. Thank you for being here. This was
course.
fun. And thanks for listening. And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks for listening to the Reach Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. That'd be a good idea. Share it with a friend and leave us a review to help others find the podcast. Now, for more resources, please visit reachothers.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you.